Hi, I'm Gavin.
And I'm Ryan.
And we're with Haverstick Designs, and we have this podcast called The S.O.U.N.D Project, but today we're doing a special edition of that specifically for AV Integrators.
Yeah. So we've had several conversations with like AV integrators that we already work with and with several of our other partners, and a lot of feedback from them has kind of said that we want to be able to speak more confidently about acoustics. And so this video is our answer to that. So after this video, we're just wanting to give you guys a resource for how to talk about acoustics more confidently, but then also what we're here for and what we can do for you. Because ultimately we want to be your go-to acoustics team for any time that you need it. So this video is going to be laid out a little bit differently. So we will have timestamps down below because some of the topics will be geared towards more salespeople versus other topics will be more tech related. So again, like at the end of the day, we just want to be here as a resource for you. But also if you have any questions, feel free to email us at info@haverstickdesigns.com.
So I think it's important for people to kind of know a little bit about who we are. And so we're an acoustical consulting firm that's based in Carmel, Indiana, which is just outside of Indianapolis. We also have another location in upstate New York. And so thing is being here in Indiana, it's where my family is. That's where the business started. But 90% of our work's out of state or overseas. You know, it's something where we've worked in 44 states, 22 countries. We're near an airport. We can get where we need to go and handle projects remotely too, if that is what's necessary. So we're a team of engineers, architects, designers, musicians, and we all have a passion for acoustics, and that's what we do every day. Mostly focus on architectural acoustics, so sound quality and sound isolation for rooms. We work in a lot of different types of spaces. Like we work in recording studios, churches, auditoriums, gymnasiums. Pretty much anywhere sound is produced is something that we can help with. And our mission statement for our business is we create rooms that inspire. You know, it's one of those things where we want obviously the room to sound amazing and perform in that respect, but we also want it to be somewhere that people feel creative. If it's a studio, for instance, we want them to be able to feel inspired and creative in that space. But the same thing goes for a house of worship, like people walking in and making sure that they feel inspired to be there on that given day. So we can help out with a lot of different things, and really, you know, this podcast we typically do is called the S.O.U.N.D Project. It's called S.O.U.N.D because of our core values, which is an acronym for sound, and it's something that everybody here lives by, and we just kind of, it keeps our focus on what we need to be doing as a business.
Yeah, absolutely. And this video, like we have a couple different goals, you know, overall for this video, but ultimately some of the benefits on the sales side are going to be just like, it's going to be a better experience for your client. It's something that we're able to really help in any way on the communication side, to where if we need to explain something to the AV team, we can, or if we need to explain something directly to the client, we can. And ultimately it's going to lead to better results too, just because like, where this is all we focus on is the acoustical side of a project. So we're able to, you know, put the time into that. And then also it avoids like having to do a project over again, where it's like sometimes, you know, sometimes budget doesn't allow, but like where acoustics becomes a secondhand thing, and the client will end up spending more money in the long run, where getting us involved early on, you know, takes that out of the equation. And then the other thing is it's nice for the AV integrator too, because if they have us involved, then we're also able to, when we do our acoustical testing, we send them back to the client, back to the AV integrator to purchase all of the treatment through them if they're a dealer. And so it helps on the revenue side for the AV integrator too. So it's kind of a win-win-win for everybody.
Yeah, I would say too, like there's a lot of benefits on the technical side of things. You know, when it comes to these projects, I mean, a lot of times they're large scale projects. You know, let's say, for instance, an auditorium or a church that's putting in a new sound system. There's a lot of investment that's going into that, and you want it to sound as good as possible, because you know you could put the best speakers in the world in a room that's untreated, and you won't get the full benefit out of it. And a lot of times clients may think that it's the speaker system or the different equipment that's causing that. It's really the room that's causing those issues. And so, you know, we can make sure that the room performs as good as possible, so that all of the investment in the gear is realized. And then when it comes to large spaces, you need to have speech intelligibility so that people can communicate well. You also want musical clarity if it's being used for something like that. Want to reduce system feedback and stage volume, like all of these things, including sound isolation, making sure you're not disturbing other people and they're not disturbing you. All of these factors combine for a positive result. And if we're involved early enough in the project and we can speak into some of those things, then it just makes for a better overall result, a better experience for that client.
Yep. We offer a lot of services here at Haverstick Designs that just depending on the project depends on what fits best. But one of those is on-site testing.
Yeah. So with on-site testing, we're a bunch of engineers around here. A lot of us are, and we like to define problems before we try to solve it. And so there's nothing better than being able to get inside a room and test it and see how it's performing in the real world. Now, obviously, if it's a new construction, there's no testing that can be done because it's not built. But if it is an existing space and they're struggling with the acoustics, we'll fly in and we'll set up microphones in different locations. We even have some subjective listening tests that we can get stakeholders from the client to engage with us and be able to listen to how the room sounds and give us feedback. But that testing just gives us that real world data to be able to compare to our computer models, which goes a long way, because if our computer models are matching with that testing data, which they typically do, but if they do, then we have really good confidence in that computer model, and we can add acoustical treatment to it and know that we have the confidence that it's going to translate in the real world that way.
Of course. And then the next one is room and facility design. So,
yeah, it's a big one. It's if it is a new construction project and we have some say over how the room is shaped or how it's sized, any sort of geometry changes in the room, and we can do that from the ground up, it can really make a huge difference. So sometimes it's just the matter of angling walls 6 degrees or making sure that we don't have a perfectly concave surface on the back wall. Like there's things that we can do that will make for a better result, one, but also save the client money when it comes to the type of acoustical treatment that would be placed in there.
Yep. Even the layout overall too, like just where rooms are located in the layout, like this phase, and this is one of the first things that we do, it just helps with the overall project.
For sure. I mean, there's a lot of times we've had some churches, for instance, where they'll have the main sanctuary share a wall with the high school room, and both of them are running a live band at the same time.
Yeah.
That could be really problematic. And if that can be avoided in the layout phase, then we can speak into that and make some changes.
Yeah. And this is a good point to kind of mention that it's never too early to get us involved. Like if the earlier that we're involved, the more say that we can have in this part of the project. So in the easier things will go.
Yeah. And it also is something where we work a lot with, we design a lot of recording studios.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're just given a blank slate. This is the area we have to work with, and we got to fit a control room, a live room, isolation booths, and all of those things. And that's where our team really shines, is that we have people on staff that are really good at those layouts to make sure that those rooms are sized appropriately to sound good.
Yep. This next one is going to focus primarily on like large rooms and like houses of worship type things, but it's reverberation time modeling.
Yeah, so for large spaces, we look at reverberation time as a metric that's pretty crucial, and that is just defined as the time it takes for sound to decay by 60 decibels. And given a room size and application, there'll be a target reverb time that we're looking at. For instance, orchestra halls, it's 2 to 2.8 seconds is what's typical. But if you're doing like dramatic performances in a space or just speech only, it might be 1 second in the same sized room. Right. So we're always trying to balance that out and make sure we get the best result possible. Some spaces are doing multiple things where they may be doing a live band 1 second, and then they might have an orchestra in there the next, or all these things matter. And we can speak into that, come up with a target reverb time, create our computer models to see where it's at without acoustical treatment, and then how we can get it to within those acceptable ranges.
Absolutely. And kind of the next step in that is the ray tracing then. Yeah,
and that's part of it too. It's not only the size and application, but then the shape really affects how the room is going to perform. Yeah. For instance, if you have a big concave back wall, it's going to focus sound to the center of the radius of curvature. And if we can avoid that in the design phase, that's great. If it's already existing, we know that we need to use special types of treatment in order to break up that focusing. Same same thing with like sidewalls. If it's a reverse fan shape for an auditorium, you don't have flutter echo naturally. But if the walls are parallel, then we need to address that too. So the ray tracing is just a way for us to build these models and see how the geometry is going to impact the way that sound propagates throughout the room. And that's going to then inform us on what treatment to put in there.
Sure. 3D photorealistic renderings are one of my favorite parts of working with Haverstick Designs, just because I feel like our renderings are very different than any other company that I've seen. And the other thing that we focus on when designing spaces, studios, and houses of worship, that we are designing for the client. We're not designing for ourselves. So all of our spaces look very different from each other. But go ahead and talk about, what that service entails.
Yeah, I always say that that's the time when things really get fun, is when we get to the rendering phase, because we're all visual people. It's something where you like to see what something's going to look like before it's finished. And with studios or auditoriums and churches, the visual aspect is a key part of it. Like for studios, it's all about the vibe and how it's going to feel being creative in those spaces. Right. But also, you want to make sure that for a church, it's inspiring and it could be soothing or comforting, or there's a lot of different aspects that go into it. So when we create these renderings, it's just a peek into that process, letting people see what it's going to look like when it's all finished. And the acoustical treatment obviously plays into that, because there's a lot of different ways you can get an acoustical result. You could do pre-made panels from a manufacturer. You can do stretched fabric systems that just kind of hide the treatment. And so the acoustical treatment, while it's necessary to put it in certain places for acoustical performance, it also is going to impact what people see. And so being able to show that in a rendering, I think it's also very nice for contractors who have to pull off that work to have a visual or a keystone to say, like, okay, this is what I need it to look like when it's all said and done, versus just seeing it on a 2D plan. It just brings it to life.
Absolutely. The final service is the sound isolation design. And this is another example of why it's really important to get us involved early on, because the sound isolation phase is a construction phase. And so if this isn't done properly up front, it gets really expensive really quickly for the client. So
for sure,
let's talk about why that's so important.
Yeah. So with sound isolation design, it's the hardest thing to deal with in acoustics. Yeah. It's one of those things where, like you said, once something is built, it's really hard to improve upon it, because it is a construction approach. Because sometimes people don't find out that they need mitigation until after the facility is open and functioning. And then they realize, oh, wow, I can hear everything that's happening in this room next to me. But by that point, sometimes the paint has been completed, sometimes all the artwork and the chairs have been installed, or anything like that is going to make it more difficult to improve it, and more expensive, honestly. Like if you're done with your construction phase and then you're having to bring a contractor back out to fix something, it's going to really drive the budget up there. So we want to try to avoid that. And so with our sound isolation design, we're able to simulate different partition types and even give people like sound examples, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But we're able to let people know how much sound isolation to expect. And then we can also detail that out in plans where we can show, hey, here's a spring hung ceiling, for instance, or here's a double studded wall, or we're using these specialized clips to show the contractor how important it is to follow those to a T, and make sure, because it's all about attention to detail and getting a good plan up front.
Right. And that goes into the next thing that I want to talk about. So just when is the best time and how to get us involved. And as I've kind of alluded to in some of the other points here, the earlier the better, always. It's never too early. Like, we have some people that reach out to us and, they're a year and a half away from starting the project. And it's like, that's fine, because that gives us the opportunity to talk with architects involved, the contractors involved, or even have a say in, like, hey, these may be some red flags on like some of these trades and things like that. So it's never too early. It also helps, just prevent mistakes being made down the road, and like kind of what we were saying with the isolation portion, where it can get really expensive if it's not done properly. Like, all of that gets saved by bringing us in early.
Yeah, I would say too, I think people feel like they're bothering us if they bring us in too early, or like, hey,
never.
we don't. Yeah, never.
Yeah.
That's never the case. I would rather know up front and allow us to speak into this rather than be surprised or handcuffed by something down the road, and that we can't. We have to compromise instead of having it the right way to begin with.
Right. And ultimately, the bottom line is it's going to save the client money. Money and a lot of frustration.
Yes.
So, and then also just how to reach out to us. We do have an inquiry form on our website. That's the best way to like reach out if you have a project, just because we do ask specific questions there. So that will help us get a really good feel for what the project is before we set up a discovery meeting with you. But also feel free to always email our sales team at info@haverstickdesigns.com. Any questions that you have, feel free to email us there. We're happy to walk you through that.
That's great.
So then let's talk a little bit about the process. So when someone reaches out to us and fills out that inquiry form, we start out with a discovery call with our sales team, which is generally going to be with me or George. And that's just getting more details about like, how can we fit into a project? Are we a good fit for the project? Like, do we add value to this project? And then from there, we create a proposal. So something I want to call out with our proposals is that we don't work hourly on projects. Like, we work on this is the cost for the entire project. So with that, we're available from start to finish of the entire project. So we just try to keep it simple. And then that also allows us to be a resource for you and any other tradespeople throughout the entirety of the project.
Yeah, it seems like clients really like that aspect of things, where we usually work off of a flat rate of some sort, because there's no surprises at the end of the project where, this took 40 hours longer, here's a bill for that. I'd just rather get the project right instead of trying to focus on those details. Obviously, if the scope changes and we're adding rooms and things like that, then that would increase the price. But most of the time, we can just stick within what we originally proposed, and there's no surprises on that front.
Exactly. And then the next thing is a kickoff call, which you tend to handle.
So when it comes to the kickoff call, once it becomes a project, it goes to a team leader of who's going to manage that project. A lot of times that's either myself or Oscar or someone else. But the kickoff call just allows us to really all get on the same page, set expectations for timelines, talk about your vision and your goals for the project, and really start digging in, and figuring out if it's a sound isolation issue, then we're starting to do modeling and figuring out what they would like when it comes to the isolation piece of it. But if it's sound quality, then we might start talking about scheduling an on-site visit and getting some testing done, or remote modeling or anything like that. And from that, once we move over to an on-site testing side of things, setting up that visit is important, just scheduling wise, because a lot of times we need to do this testing in empty rooms that are not occupied, and there's not other noise sources that are going on at the same time, so we can have a quiet room. And with that, it's a pretty seamless process. A lot of times the testing can all happen in one day. It's not spread out over a week or anything like that. We can fly in, get the testing done. I always say that we have enough information to be dangerous at that point, and we come back to the office and do some of the harder work, because that's a bit more of a fact-finding mission when you're doing the on-site testing. Then from there, it moves into our reporting and recommendations phase. So usually we provide a report that's written out about what kind of testing or modeling that we have done, and why these are problems, explain a little bit of why we're doing what we're doing. And then it also comes with typically a CAD set that's showing exactly what we need to do, whether that be sound isolation, construction design, or just placement and selection of acoustical treatment. And that gets delivered. We're obviously always available for having a meeting to review that report and those deliverables and make adjustments. Like there's sometimes we place something in a CAD set, and there's an exit sign that's going to be there. We need to move this panel. So it's not like when we send the report, we're all done. It's kind of the start of the conversation. And also renderings would happen in that phase as well, and kind of feedback back and forth. Usually, jumping back to that kickoff call, we'll ask for inspiration shots of images of spaces that inspire them, and that can help us with our recommendations too. And then at the end of it is just the project support. We're always available. It's something where we pride ourselves on being responsive, and making sure that if someone has a question for us, that we can answer it quickly and get them the information they need.
Yeah. And so next I want to go into some case studies of where we talked about briefly the different kinds of projects that we work on. So now we're just going to do a brief case study of each kind of project essentially. So
Sure.
For the house of worship side of things, we're going to talk about Passion City Church.
Yeah. So Passion City Church, it was awesome to get that call to say we're going to help with their new campus. They're just a wonderful church down in the Atlanta area, and they were building their Cumberland campus. And we got the call from an AV integrator to be involved and be part of that team. And those initial conversations with them, one of the biggest things was that the setup for the room was going to be wider than it was long.
Yeah.
A lot of times in churches you'll see a longer room, but it's not as wide. But when it's wider than it is long, it creates a little bit more of an intimate environment where there's more people closer to the stage.
Yep.
And that was one of the goals. But then also they wanted it to not seem overly dead. They wanted some liveliness to it. They obviously have a amazing group of musicians at Passion City Church, and so they wanted that sound to be full and enveloping and lively. And so part of that, you have to select the right acoustical treatment, because if you go into rooms like that and you put 2-inch absorption everywhere and that's it, then it's going to be overly dry in the high end and sometimes sound a little bit muffled and muddy in the low end. And so we actually we can go to this next slide here. This is just showing the layout of the room. And the layout of the room was, again, wider than it was long, and the seating kind of wraps around the stage. And so we created a model of this space, and we predicted like what the reverb time was going to be. I even on this project, I went and did on-site testing at their 515 campus, just because they liked the sound of it.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to see what it sounded like, and also get reverb time measurements, frequency response measurements, because if they already enjoy something, then I would rather emulate that than to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
And so we went down to Atlanta, did some testing, and then that informed us on some of the decisions. But the treatment that we used, one thing is the visual aspect of things. You could put just rectangular panels spaced evenly across the back wall and do pretty well, but visually that may not be as interesting as something else. And so we worked with the interior designer on this one and created, they're still square and rectangular panels, but they're also different thicknesses. So they range from 2 inches up to 4 inches thick. And so when you look at the back wall, it's like little blocks that are coming in and out of the room. Just gives some more visual elements, but then also working in some thicker treatment, it gives us some better low frequency response in the room too.
Sure.
We also used a panel from Acoustical Fulfillment called a perf panel, which underneath the fabric, before you reach the fiberglass, there's a perforated facing that increases low frequency absorption by 80%, but it's only half as effective at absorbing high frequency sounds. And so going back to their vision and goal of having a more lively room, this still gives you control, but doesn't suck all the life out of the room when it comes to the high frequencies. And so, yeah, the end result, I've been there a few times since it's been completed, and it does what they wanted it to do. They're very, very pleased with it. It's just a beautiful space, but then also it's like they're able to worship the way they want to.
Good.
Yeah.
The next case study that we're going to look at is on the university side. So we work with universities a lot, whether it be lecture halls or if they're doing a studio. We work with education and universities quite often. So for this case study, we're going to talk about a lecture hall that we did with Grace College.
Yeah, so Grace College is in Winona Lake, Indiana. We're located in Indiana as well, so it's somewhat local for us.
Yep.
Maybe 2-hour drive from here. And we got brought in after the fact. So this is a good example of getting us involved as early as possible. We could have avoided some of these issues, but after they had built this space, they realized they had an issue on their hands. And the reason is that it was a circular room. Right. I mentioned earlier about concave surfaces focusing sound to the center of the radius of curvature. Well, that's right in the center of this room because it's a complete circle. And the way the room was designed was kind of classroom in the round, where the professor would stand in the center and address all the chairs that are around the perimeter of the room. when I went there to do testing and I stood in the center of the room and I spoke, it sounds like 50 of me speaking, and it's very, very distracting. Like you, as a professor, many of them were like, I wouldn't even be able to teach in a space like this. And so we needed to remedy that. And so we went there, did testing. Here's a picture of the room here where we have a test loudspeaker and a microphone. Notice that there's drywall on the walls, so it's a reflective surface, but it did have a drop tile ceiling. So it was handling the floor to ceiling reflections pretty well, but everything else was just a reflective surface. And when we looked at the impulse response of the room, it was pretty dramatic. What this is at time equals 0 there is the direct sound hitting the microphone, and then every one of those spikes that you see along the graph is a reflection coming back delayed. And it's very rhythmic. You can see the spacing of those peaks are identical as you're going along. And that's what happens when you see focusing in a room. So this was the testing that was done before. We also had the opportunity, since it's local, to be able to go back and do testing after it's completed. And the impulse response looked like this afterwards. And just all those spikes were removed or severely lessened. And the way that we did that was using a product from acoustical filament called wedge panels. A little trick is that if you put acoustical panels on a concave curved surface, just a normal flat rectangular panel, if you just put it parallel to that surface, it actually doesn't take the focusing out of play. It does reduce the reverb time, but the focusing can still happen because there's an incident reflection off the front face of that fabric, that fabric panel that then still focuses towards the center. So if you're using regular panels, you actually have to angle them about 10 degrees to remove that phenomenon. But these wedge panels have the angle built in. And so they're 1 inch thick on one side, 3 inches thick on the other, and we space those around the room evenly. You'll notice in this picture, they're actually spaced a foot apart because they're a foot wide. And we are trying to value engineer things, again, something that we do all the time. And so we started with this because it fit their budget a little better. But if they needed more control, we could always go back in and put a wedge panel in that negative space. But it turns out after we had got that finished, here's a picture of the room when it was complete. They were really, really happy with the results, and you know, the professor could stand in the center of the room like he was hoping to, and address the students. So a big success. You know, it was a bit of a moment for the people involved when they built the room and stood in it and said, "Oh no, what did we do?" But it was something that's fixable.
Good. Now, the next one is going to be another example of a house of worship that we've done, and it's Christ Fellowship.
Yeah. So this one was an interesting one because it was a new facility for them in Port St. Lucie, Florida, and it was a precast concrete building. And concrete doesn't absorb low frequencies well. It's just a solid surface. It doesn't budge. It reflects that energy back into the room. Whereas drywall actually has a sympathetic vibration and absorbs some energy in the low end. Well, with this being completely precast concrete room, concrete floor with thin carpet on it, and then a steel ceiling, it wasn't the greatest when we first started. And we modeled the room, and in the low frequency range, like 125 hertz, the reverb time was 6.5 seconds long. That's an eternity. You know, it lingers in the room way longer than all the mids and highs and creates a room that sounds really muffled, you know, and bass heavy. And with that, I just was curious. I swapped out the concrete for drywall walls. And if we just did that, just that one switch, it would have dropped that reverb time from 6.5 seconds to 1.4 seconds. And that is just a huge difference on just the surface materials that are selected. So we can work with your architects and your clients to actually make a better starting point. Doesn't mean that we won't have acoustical treatment in the room, but it's going to be a better starting point that we might not have to do so much heavy lifting with the treatment. So with this space, I have some pictures of when it was finished. We ended up using a combination of those perf panels I talked about earlier that gives us that low frequency absorption but doesn't kill off the high end as much. But then we also use barrel diffusers, which are really efficient at absorbing low frequencies, like absorption coefficient of 1.62 at 125 hertz. But it does like 0.2 in the higher frequency range. So we wanted to control the room but not completely deaden it, and it was great. We also used some panels up in the ceiling too, because it's a really large space. You can see these barrel diffusers and perf panels on the sidewall there, and it actually, there's a big Acoustics sound system in there, and the guys from Acoustics said it was one of the best sounding rooms they've heard their systems in. When it started off as a nightmare, and obviously it takes a lot of design work and planning and preparation. And obviously there's some cost for acoustical materials, but we were able to get that room sounding amazing, even though it started off with a lot of challenges.
Right. The next case study is going to be the studio realm. So this is one of my favorite projects that we have going on right now, but it's Studio 33.3 in Grand Rapids.
Yes. So we design a lot of recording studios, and this is, again, is one of my favorites as well. We were contacted by Grand Rapids First Church in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And they were building a studio for worship leaders around the world to come and record their albums and write music. And just an amazing story that the worship pastor at the church, Sarah, she had passed away from cancer at age 27. And she was the pastor's daughter, just an amazing talent. She had won so many awards for worship leading and just had a heart for ministry. And she always loved to bring up other worship leaders, share her experience and her talents with other people. And so when she was diagnosed, they actually started a foundation in her name in order to create a facility like this that her story can live on. In fact, she even had a tattoo, and she got her diagnosis of ellipses on her wrist. That was just, my story is going to go on after this is all finished. So, I mean, anytime we can be involved in something like this, it's just way bigger than us. I mean, every project's bigger than us, but this one for sure.
Especially.
And so Studio 33.3 is her life verse was Psalm 33.3, which is sing a new song of praise to him, play skillfully on the harp, and sing with joy. And so that was our mindset going into this design, is just make it something that really carries that out. And so what we did was create in their space already. They had a location where we could put this studio. And we did a layout, that kind of facility design where they knew they wanted a control room, a live room, an ISO booth that was big enough to put a piano, and then an ISO booth for vocals and a couple amp rooms. Also, there's a lounge because there's always needs to be some place for people to hang out in. And so we came up with this layout. It's probably layout 8 or 9. We came up with a lot of different options for them, but this one really fit well. Good sight lines from room to room. Control room's nice and big because we're doing a Dolby Atmos surround sound system in there. And once we decided on this, then we got to move to the fun part of doing renderings. And this next slide is one of the renderings from the back corner of the control room, looking towards the live room and the ISO booth. And it's just a beautiful space. They actually were inspired by the studios we did for David Crowder and Brooklyn Duo, kind of that clean white LED lighting to change the colors of the room. You'll notice too, we try to work in some elements like the ceiling, the lighting there is an ellipses to match Sarah's tattoo. So we just really take a lot of care in this rendering phase. I'll show you the live room as well. The live room is nice and tall. We have 16-foot ceilings, I believe, at the peak there, and just room for a complete band to go in there and track live if they want to, but then have the flexibility in these ISO booths like the piano room here, and that telescoping door between the piano room and the live room allows that piano just roll from room to room and just ultimate flexibility. Also, the lounge here, we rendered that as well because that's a part of the project. And it's in construction right now. I think we're targeting November 2024 opening date for it. And I'm just so excited for seeing it come to life.
Yeah. And these are just a couple of examples of some projects that we've done, but we're also doing one with the Palladium locally right now, which is a conversion from a classical type style venue to now they're trying to be more of a blend between classical and rock and contemporary type music.
Yes.
We've also done a lot of libraries, a lot of gymnasiums. So it's really anything, while these are just a couple of examples, really anything that involves acoustics, we can get involved in.
Yeah. And my thing is that if you're out there listening to this, it's just reach out and ask us. If you have plans or ideas that a client comes to you and is like, hey, I want to do this, and you think there could be some acoustical ramification to that, just give us a call and we can talk through it.
Exactly. The next thing I want to talk about is, like I mentioned early on, the biggest goal with this video is to be a resource for you. And so now there are some resources that we already have developed, but there's also more that we plan on making as time goes on as well. So these are just going to be a couple of examples of the resources that we have available already, and then we'll just briefly go through how you can use them for your projects.
Yeah, the first one I want to talk about is the sound isolation simulator, and it's located on our website. Up at the top, there's a menu item for acoustical tools, and that's where it lives. And if you click on sound isolation simulator, we have conversations all the time with people about sound isolation, and it's a very subjective topic. You know, it's something where what's acceptable for one person is just a nightmare for the next person.
Right.
And we want to make sure that we understand the level of isolation that someone expects.
Yes.
And it's really hard to do if you're just talking about it. Like if you're saying, hey, we're going to build this double wall structure, they may think that they'll be able to hear a pin drop on the other side and nothing is going to be able to pass through the wall. But that's not always the case. Sometimes the low end passes through. And so what we developed this for was allow people to actually hear what different partitions are going to offer.
Yeah.
And so the way it works is there's a no partition sound sample there on the website. You click on it, and you want to listen to this with nice set of speakers that can produce bass or a decent set of headphones. A laptop just doesn't really do it justice, but you turn up that sound as loud as it'll safely go.
Yep.
Like you don't want to let the smoke out of your speakers, but you do want it to be really loud to make it feel like you're in the room with a live band, like so 100 decibels plus. And you leave your volume set the same, and as you scroll down this website, you'll see all these different partition types, and it gives you an explanation of how it was built, what its STC, which is sound transmission class, what that rating is, what the price per square foot for the cost of the materials only, not the labor, but just materials. But it gives you a bunch of information, and next to each one of those is a play button. And if you hit play next to that, you'll hear what it would relatively sound like on the other side of that wall if a live band was playing on the other side. So it's been super helpful. A lot of AV integrators and architects, they use it as part of their design process, and feel free to do that. I mean, pull up the website and have a speaker system there with your client and run through it with them if you want.
It's one of those that it just gives everyone a really good starting point of this is the expectation and this is how we can achieve that.
Exactly. I usually tell them, I say, let me know which wall type, because it ranks them in order of how much isolation you get from lowest to highest. But let me know the wall type when it starts to sound good to you. And it doesn't mean that we're going to design things exactly like that, but now I have information. I know what they expect and we can design to that.
Exactly. The next one is the reverberation time simulator.
Yeah, that one is another one similar to sound isolation simulator in that it's always best if someone can hear it, versus you could say all day long, like our target reverb time in this room is 1.2 seconds. And some people might have an idea of what that sounds like. Other people would have no clue. And so with this reverb time simulator, there's about, I think, 10 to 12 examples on there of past projects that we've done where you can hear what a choir, a praise band, and someone speaking would sound like in the room before treatment and after treatment. And it's just really beneficial because there are a lot of people out there that they just don't know what impact acoustical treatment is going to do for their space. And they may think it's minor. But when you listen to some of these sound samples and the room goes from 2.5 seconds down to 1 second, and you hear how much cleaner the speech could be heard, or the praise band is not just a garbled mess in that space, it's important to be able to hear it firsthand and make some decisions. And so I think it's a great tool and resource for AV integrators to use with their clients, and just get their opinion.
These two simulators that we've talked about so far are two of the biggest things that I think of when AV integrators and partners were telling us that, we want to speak about acoustics more confidently. These two tools are prime examples of ways that you can talk to your client and explain why is it so important to think about isolation up front? Why is it so important to have acoustical treatment in your plan? These tools will show you why it is so important.
I think that's great. And I do also want to mention that sometimes AV integrators won't bring up acoustics because it's just another topic that could increase the cost of their bid, and maybe they wouldn't get that project. In my experience, the clients just really they value the fact that you're thinking ahead, and that you're worried about these things for them, because they're probably not thinking about it.
Right.
And so in my experience, it's just something where if you can have these conversations about sound isolation and reverb time and sound quality early on in a project, your clients actually will thank you for it.
Yeah, exactly. The next one is we present AIA courses.
Yeah, so AIA is the American Institute of Architects, and we're certified as a CEU provider, a continuing education provider. And so we have 4 different courses that we offer, and they range from one's just on fundamental of acoustics, one's acoustical results in education facilities. We have one focused more on houses of worship, and then one just on speaking to your clients about acoustics. So we go around the country, either remotely or in person, and give these courses to architects, because they require, typically it's around 18 hours of continuing education every year to keep their license. And so they're looking for this information, but it's also something that when the topic of acoustics comes up, a lot of architects, they're hiring that out to other people, and so they need resources. And so we give these types of presentations for the AV integrators out there that maybe aren't certified to give these sort of courses. We could partner with you on those courses and build relationships with architects in your area, which is going to lead to more opportunities for the AV integrator, for us to work together on these projects to make sure that it's the best results possible.
Yeah. The last one is our YouTube channel. So a year ago, we started the podcast, which is just there's a resource, but then we also have like studio tours going through, what is the process like? What are some examples of the work? But do you want to talk a little bit about the podcast?
Yeah, the podcast has been great. We're 50 plus episodes in, over a year worth of that. And there's different topics. Every week, Monday at noon, we release a new episode. And some of them could be on speaker placement. Some of them could be on what is reverberation time, and just good resources to where if you have a client that's curious about a certain topic, that we've probably covered it or at least talked a little bit about it on the podcast. So the podcast has been great, and it's a good resource for you. And then also we do a lot of tours of studios that we've designed. And so if you're ever working with clients that have recording studio needs, there's a lot of tours on our website that our YouTube channel that allows people to see a little bit behind the scenes about what is going on with those jobs and all the work and planning and execution that need to happen to make these high-end studios come to life.
Yeah. And the thing with the podcast as well is that if it is something that you want to send to your client to go over a specific topic, we have created a one sheet with timestamps in which episode to go to for certain topics. So if that's helpful for you, don't hesitate to reach out. Our email is info@haverstickdesigns.com. And if you just request that like one sheet for what timestamp is what topic for all of our episodes, I'm happy to send that to you as well.
Yeah, I literally have that on my desktop because I use it so frequently because people ask a question. And it's sometimes easier to show an example rather than trying to type out a response. So
absolutely. It just makes the whole process so much easier where like it's already explained so you don't have to go and research it. Like you can just say, hey, here's a link, go to this time, this episode, and that's all the info that you need on it.
It's great.
Time to wrap up. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, again, like the biggest thing with this whole video was just that we want you guys to know that we're here as a resource for you. Again, like we would love to be your go-to acoustical team anytime that it comes up. But yeah, what else do you have to add?
Well, I would say that you guys are busy, right? And there's so many things that you have to concern yourselves with on a big project like this. And sometimes acoustics isn't one that you're excited about tackling, or you don't have the bandwidth to do it. And that's what we're here for. I'm a big proponent of letting people do what they're great at. Yeah. And all we do is acoustics, and we love to partner with AV integrators to be that team for them that they can rely on and know it's going to get taken care of well. Communication's going to be prompt and efficient, because honestly, sometimes people don't talk about acoustical treatment because it's a big headache.
Yeah.
It's like like, what do we do? Where do we put things? Then I got to order it from a manufacturer and install it and all this. It really doesn't have to be that difficult, and we just want to make it easy for people.
Yeah.
We're super easy to work with, and something where it's pretty seamless process.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't have to be difficult.
And again, that's one of those where you mentioned like we try to be easy to work with, but also like, I mean, we communicate like really heavily. So it's like if the client needs anything, if the AV integrator needs anything, you know, we're here as a resource from start to finish of the entire project.
Yeah. So I would just encourage people to reach out if you guys have potential projects that you want us to look at, or even if you just want to set up a meeting and meet us and learn a little bit more about our process and how we can integrate with you, because every AV integrator is a little bit different in what they need from us. And we'd love to learn that about you and be able to be that provider for you.
And that's something too, like all of our services are very modular. So if not every project is going to need everything that we offer. So we're happy to make those adjustments as the project requires as well. Don't hesitate to reach out at info@haverstickdesigns.com.
Yeah, so really appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this video. We're excited to meet you and learn more and partner with you on these projects, and look forward to connecting.